My guard donkeys smashed the HOA's new lights, and they billed me $96,000. There was just one problem. Those expensive fixtures had been installed on land I owned. Welcome back, everyone. Before today's story begins, I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. If this is your first time on the channel, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll always know when a new story is released. Your support means more than you know. Every like, comment, and subscription helps this channel grow and allows us to keep sharing incredible stories with viewers around the world. And before we begin, tell me this, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. Now, grab a comfortable seat, relax, and let's dive into today's unforgettable story. The bill says $96,000. I read the number again because sometimes your brain refuses to accept stupidity on the first pass. $96,000. The certified envelope had arrived at 8:14 on a Tuesday morning. I was standing beside the red pasture gate at Red Creek Ranch, coffee cooling in one hand, while Roscoe and June grazed 20 yards behind me like two animals with absolutely no concern for corporate accounting. My name is Mason Whitaker. I'm 48, and before I bought this ranch, I spent 19 years operating heavy equipment. Excavators, graders, trenchers. You spend enough time moving dirt for a living. You learn one rule quickly. Always know where the property line is before you dig. Apparently, Cedar Ridge Estates had skipped that lesson. The letter came from their HOA. Property damage assessment. 3 lighting poles. LED fixtures. Control equipment. Emergency contractor mobilization. Landscape restoration. Administrative costs. Total due, $96,000. I was halfway through the second page when my phone rang. Cynthia Langford, HOA president. Of course. Mason, I assume you've received the assessment. I've received something. Your animals caused extensive damage to association property. I looked across the pasture. 3 black decorative poles stood near the eastern fence line. One leaned at an angle. Another had a shattered fixture hanging from its housing. Pieces of clear lens glittered in the grass where I'd flagged them off so the animals couldn't step on them. Those poles hadn't existed 4 days earlier. You're talking about the lights? I'm talking about $96,000 in damages. That's interesting. What exactly is interesting? I rested the envelope against the gate. That you're billing me for HOA property installed inside my pasture. Silence. Not long. Just enough. That corridor belongs to the association, Cynthia said. No. You have drainage access near that boundary. The association has maintained that corridor for years. Maintenance isn't ownership. Her voice hardened. Your donkeys destroyed professionally installed infrastructure. I glanced at Roscoe. He lifted his head, ears forward, chewing slowly. Roscoe was a 12-year-old guard donkey built like a filing cabinet with legs. June was smaller, quicker, and suspicious of anything new entering her pasture. I kept them with my goats because coyotes had become a problem along the creek. They weren't attack animals. They weren't trained to destroy equipment. But 2 nights earlier, something had turned their dark pasture white. I'd woken to a metallic clang followed by a crack sharp enough to carry through my bedroom window. Then Roscoe started braying. When I reached the porch, 3 new LED lights were blazing along the eastern fence. June was running the perimeter. Roscoe stood near a tilted pole, snorting at a loose protective barrier that hadn't been there before. I'd shut the animals into the western paddock and called the contractor number printed on a temporary equipment tag. I hadn't touched the wiring. By sunrise, I'd photographed everything. Hoofprints, fresh auger soil, orange conduit markers, and one section of livestock barrier that had clearly been moved. Now Cynthia wanted $96,000. You'll need to arrange payment with the association, she said. Before we discuss payment, send me the recorded easement. You already know the HOA has access rights. I know you have some rights. I want to know exactly which ones. Mason and Cynthia? What? Send the document that says you can install lighting. She exhaled sharply. Our attorney can address that. Perfect. I ended the call. Then I walked toward the damaged poles. The morning grass was still wet enough to darken my boots. Near the nearest concrete footing, fresh soil formed a pale ring against the pasture. I followed it toward the fence. That's when I saw the tire tracks. They came through the red gate, not from the HOA road. Through my gate. I looked back at the house. A security camera sat beneath the barn eave, pointed directly toward that entrance. The $96,000 letter suddenly felt less like a bill. It felt like evidence. I pulled out my phone and called my attorney. Then I went inside to find out exactly who had entered my land and what they'd done while I was gone. The night my pasture turned white, I knew somebody had changed more than the view. It happened 48 hours before the $96,000 letter arrived. At 11:37 p.m., I woke to a metallic clang from the east pasture. Then came a sharp crack. Roscoe started braying so hard the sound carried through the bedroom wall. I pulled on jeans, boots, and a jacket and stepped onto the porch. For 12 years, that pasture had been dark at night except for moonlight and the amber security lamp above my barn. Not anymore. 3 LED poles were throwing hard white light across the grass. I actually stood there for a second wondering if I was still half asleep. Then June ran through one of the beams. Roscoe followed, ears pinned, snorting at something near the fence. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward them. The smell reached me first. Fresh dirt, cut grass, hot plastic. Someone had been digging. Near the first pole, a temporary orange barrier lay twisted sideways. June paced behind it while Roscoe shoved his nose toward a black equipment housing mounted low beside the concrete footing. Easy. I approached slowly. Another fixture flickered overhead. I didn't touch it. 19 years around construction equipment had taught me enough about electrical installations to know that damaged hardware and nighttime improvisation were a bad combination. Instead, I moved Roscoe and June toward the western paddock. June followed. Roscoe needed convincing. Once both animals were behind a secure gate, I returned with my phone. The scene looked worse up close. One pole leaned several degrees. A clear lens had shattered across the grass. Another housing showed a deep dent. Hoofprints surrounded the disturbed soil. There was no mystery about whether my animals had interacted with the equipment. They had. But there was a bigger question. Where had the equipment come from? I followed a strip of freshly disturbed ground toward the red gate. Orange conduit markers appeared every few yards. Then my flashlight caught tire impressions in the damp soil. Wide tread. Probably a compact excavator or skid steer. The tracks passed directly through the gate. I crouched beside the latch. Fresh scratches marked the steel. Someone had opened it. 10 feet farther down, the livestock barrier I'd installed to separate the goats and donkeys from the drainage edge wasn't where I'd left it. 2 panels had been shifted. One securing chain hung loose. That explained why Roscoe had reached the equipment. It didn't explain who moved the barrier. A laminated tag hung from the nearest control cabinet. Cedar Ridge Lighting Improvement Project. Below it was the contractor's emergency number. I called. A sleepy dispatcher answered. I gave her the project number and explained that damaged equipment was standing inside an active livestock pasture. Do not approach exposed electrical components, she said. I haven't. She contacted an on-call technician and told me the circuit would be checked. By 12:25, the lights went dark. The pasture became mine again. Quiet. Black. Normal. I spent another 20 minutes photographing everything before going inside. The next morning, sunlight exposed details darkness had hidden. Fresh concrete. Auger spoil. Boot prints. Tire tracks. 3 newly installed poles. And beside the eastern fence, the moved barrier. Roscoe stood behind me chewing hay as if none of it concerned him. Don't look innocent, I told him. He flicked one ear. I wasn't going to pretend my donkeys hadn't damaged those lights. Evidence said otherwise. But evidence worked both directions. I walked toward the barn and looked up at the security camera beneath the eave. Its lens faced the red gate. The system stored 30 days of footage. I opened the app and scrolled backward. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Then I stopped. Wednesday afternoon, 2:16 p.m. A white utility truck appeared on screen. Behind it came a mini excavator. The red gate opened, and someone wearing a Cedar Ridge HOA jacket walked in with them. The woman in the HOA jacket was Cynthia Langford. I froze the security footage at 2:19 p.m. and leaned closer to the monitor. There she was beside my red gate, sunglasses on, clipboard tucked against her hip, while a contractor guided the mini excavator into my pasture. Not near my property. Inside it. I called Rachel Monroe, my attorney. You busy? Usually. I have video. That got her attention. 25 minutes later, I was replaying the footage on my laptop while Rachel watched through a video call. The first truck arrived at 2:16. A contractor stepped out and examined the gate. At 2:18, Cynthia's SUV appeared from the subdivision side. She spoke with the crew supervisor, pointed toward the eastern pasture, then watched him open the gate. Nobody knocked at my house. Nobody called me. Nobody left a notice. At 2:31, the excavator rolled through. Keep going, Rachel said. I advanced the recording. Workers marked the ground, unloaded poles, and began drilling. Then, at 3:07, one man reached the livestock barrier. He tried positioning equipment around it. Couldn't. So he unhooked the chain. He and another worker shifted 2 panels several feet west. I felt my jaw tighten. There. I see it, Rachel said. They completed the work without restoring the barrier to its original position. That mattered. Roscoe and June hadn't escaped my property. The protective separation inside their own pasture had been altered by the people installing the lights. At 5:42, Cynthia returned to the gate. She spoke briefly with the supervisor, looked at the new poles, and left. Rachel was quiet for several seconds. Save the original files. Don't edit them. Make backups. Already doing it. And don't send Cynthia clips. I wasn't planning to. Good. Let her attorney explain their authority first. The next morning, Cynthia's lawyer finally sent the easement. At first glance, it looked bad for me. Cedar Ridge Drainage and Maintenance Easement. Recorded 27 years earlier. 12 feet wide along part of my eastern boundary. I called Rachel. So they do have an easement. They have an easement, she corrected. That doesn't answer whether they had the right to build this. I read further. Inspection. Maintenance. Repair. Replacement of drainage facilities. Reasonable access for those purposes. Nothing about decorative lighting. Nothing about entrance beautification. Nothing giving the HOA general control over my pasture. Rachel asked one question. Where are the poles relative to the 12-foot strip? I don't know. Then we find out. By noon, I'd hired surveyor Caleb Turner. He arrived carrying a tripod, receiver, field tablet, and the expression of a man who trusted coordinates more than people. We walked the eastern boundary. He found an old survey pin near the creek. Then another monument beside the red gate. Cynthia arrived before he finished. She stayed outside the fence. What are you doing? Surveying my property. The HOA already has surveys. Then ours should agree. Her eyes moved toward Caleb. This corridor is association controlled. Rachel's advice echoed in my head. Don't argue conclusions before you have measurements. So I didn't. I asked instead, does your easement authorize decorative lighting? It authorizes infrastructure necessary for community operations. That wasn't my question. Her expression hardened. You're responsible for the damage regardless. Maybe. That answer surprised her. I pointed toward the poles. My animals damaged equipment. I'm not denying that. Cynthia almost smiled. Then I pointed at the ground beneath them. But liability gets interesting when somebody installs equipment where they may not have permission to install it. The smile disappeared. Caleb called me over. He was standing beside the nearest concrete footing, staring at his tablet. Problem? I asked. He looked toward Cynthia, then back at me. I need to finish the survey before I certify anything. Understood. He tapped the screen. But this pole. Yeah. It isn't just near the edge of the easement. He looked down at the fresh concrete. It's outside it. The 12-foot line changed everything. Caleb returned the next morning with 2 field assistants and enough equipment to make the eastern pasture look like a small engineering project. The air smelled of wet grass and diesel from his truck. Roscoe watched from behind the western paddock fence, apparently offended that strangers were measuring his territory without consulting him. By noon, Caleb had located the recorded easement. Not approximately. Not according to Cynthia's landscaping. On the ground. He marked its limits with blue flags. I walked beside him from the creek toward the red gate. The drainage easement was 12 feet wide, exactly as the recorded instrument described. It followed part of my eastern boundary and gave Cedar Ridge access for inspection, maintenance, repair, and replacement of drainage facilities. Then we reached the lights. The first concrete footing sat 18 inches beyond Caleb's blue line. The second was farther out. The third pole stood nearly 4 feet outside the easement. I stared at it. So Cynthia was wrong. Caleb shook his head. I'm telling you where the easement is. Rachel can tell you what rights it grants. Surveyors and lawyers had apparently attended the same school for careful sentences. Then Caleb pointed toward the control cabinet. That one's worse. The black cabinet stood beside the pasture fence with orange conduit disappearing beneath fresh soil. How far? Entirely outside the easement. I photographed the blue flags, poles, cabinet, survey stakes, and fence. Rachel arrived shortly after 2. She stood beside the first footing reading the recorded document while wind snapped the pages against her clipboard. Here's the important part, she said. She read the permitted purposes aloud. Drainage inspection, maintenance, repair, replacement, no lighting, no decorative entrance improvements, no general utility installation. I looked toward Cedar Ridge. So they had permission to enter. For specific purposes, Rachel said. An easement isn't a blank check. That was the first moment I understood the real shape of the fight. Cynthia hadn't invented the HOA's authority. That would have been easier. She had taken something real and stretched it until it covered whatever she wanted. My phone buzzed. Another email from Cedar Ridge. Final notice of damage liability. I opened the attachment. The $96,000 assessment was still there. Now it included a demand that I confine my livestock away from what Cynthia called the HOA-controlled utility corridor. Rachel read the phrase over my shoulder. Utility corridor? The recorded document says drainage easement. I noticed. She smiled without humor. Words get ambitious when people need them to. We walked back toward the barn and spread everything across my workbench. Survey, deed, easement, damage photographs, security footage timestamps. Rachel drew 2 columns on a legal pad. What your animals did, she said. What the HOA did. Under the first column, damaged fixtures. Dented housing. Possible pole damage. Under the second, entered through gate. Moved livestock barrier. Installed equipment. Placed multiple structures outside surveyed easement. Activated lighting inside livestock pasture. Don't confuse the two, she said. Your donkeys causing damage doesn't automatically answer whether you're responsible for every dollar they're demanding. I nodded. What do we do? Make them explain $96,000. The detailed invoice arrived that evening. I printed it at the kitchen table. Replacement fixtures. Pole removal. Electrical inspection. Contractor remobilization. Landscape restoration. Administrative assessment. Then one line caught my attention. Upgraded impact-resistant fixture package. I read it twice. Those weren't the fixtures Roscoe and June had damaged. They were proposed replacements. Another charge covered completion work on the entrance lighting project. I called Rachel. They're billing me for upgrades. I see it. And unfinished project work. I see that too. I leaned back, listening to Roscoe bray faintly from the barn. The HOA had started with a simple accusation. My donkeys broke their lights. But the invoice told a different story. They weren't just asking me to pay for what had been damaged. They were asking me to help finish what they might never have had permission to build. $96,000 sounds frightening until you ask someone to explain every dollar. Rachel did exactly that. By Thursday morning, Cedar Ridge's attorney had sent us a detailed damage package with invoices, photographs, contractor estimates, and 3 pages of language explaining why I was supposedly responsible. Rachel printed everything. Then she brought a yellow highlighter. We sat at my kitchen table while rain tapped against the windows and June stood beneath the porch roof outside, watching us like she expected legal representation too. Original fixture replacement, Rachel said. Reasonable category. She highlighted it. Electrical safety inspection. Potentially reasonable. Another mark. Pole removal and disposal. Another. Then she stopped. Upgraded impact-resistant fixture package. That's the one. These weren't installed before the incident? No, she circled the amount. Then this isn't simply repair cost. Next came contractor remobilization. Then completion of trenching. Then landscaping around portions of the lighting corridor that hadn't even been finished before Roscoe and June encountered the equipment. Finally, an administrative assessment equal to 15% of several project charges. I stared at the total. They took one damaged installation and wrapped the rest of the project around it. That's what we're asking them to justify. Rachel never used bigger words than the evidence allowed. I like that about her. At 10:20, Caleb emailed his preliminary survey exhibit. Blue lines marked the 12-foot drainage easement. Red outlined my deeded parcel. Yellow circles showed every lighting structure. I counted them twice. 5 proposed installation points. 3 had already received poles. Of those 3, every concrete footing extended at least partly outside the easement. The control cabinet sat completely outside it. A section of buried conduit also appeared to cross beyond the recorded strip. I called Caleb. Are you comfortable with these measurements? Comfortable enough to show counsel. I'm still completing certification. Fair. There's something else. He zoomed into the map. The drainage structure the easement actually serves is closer to the property line. Their lighting alignment shifts inward toward your pasture, meaning the lights hadn't simply followed existing drainage infrastructure. Someone had chosen a different line. Rachel sent Cedar Ridge a preservation and information request that afternoon. Project plans, contractor communications, board approvals, scope documents, any written authorization from me, any instrument they believed permitted decorative lighting. Cynthia called 20 minutes later. You're turning a straightforward property damage matter into litigation. No lawsuit has been filed. You hired an attorney. So did you. Your animals destroyed our equipment. I've never disputed that they damaged it. She paused. That answer still bothered her. Probably because she wanted me to deny the obvious. I wouldn't. Then pay for it, she said. I'll take responsibility for whatever I'm legally responsible for. You're responsible for controlling your livestock. And you're responsible for knowing where you build. Her voice cooled. The board approved that project. I looked through the kitchen window toward the blue survey flags fluttering in the rain. Did I? What? Approve it. The association didn't require your approval. Then send Rachel the document proving that. She hung up. 2 days later, Cedar Ridge produced the project plans. Rachel forwarded them without commentary. I opened the PDF in my office. The proposed lighting corridor was clearly drawn. So was a note near the eastern boundary. Verify property access prior to installation. My pulse slowed. Not quickened. Slowed. Because somebody on that project had asked the right question. I kept reading. On the next page, beside the control cabinet location, another note appeared. Owner authorization if required. There was no signature beside it. No permit from me. No access agreement. Nothing. Then Rachel called. Don't get excited yet. I wasn't. Good. Plans raise questions. Emails answer them. Do we have the emails? Not yet. I looked outside. Roscoe stood beside the red gate, rain rolling off his back. Beyond him, the damaged poles leaned over wet grass. For days, Cynthia had been telling me the case began when my donkeys hit those lights. The project plan suggested otherwise. The real story may have started earlier, with somebody asking whether Cedar Ridge had permission and somebody deciding not to wait for the answer. The email arrived Friday at 4:38 p.m., and one sentence was enough to change the temperature in the room. Rachel had forwarded a batch of contractor communications produced by Cedar Ridge's attorney. Her message above them contained 4 words. Read page 17 first. I opened the attachment. The email was dated 11 days before installation. The sender was the lighting contractor's project manager, Daniel Reeves. Cynthia was copied along with 2 HOA board members. Daniel's question was simple. Do we have landowner approval for installations extending beyond the recorded drainage easement? I stared at it. Below that was Cynthia's response. Owner authorization pending. Proceed under existing easement. I read it twice. Then once more. Rachel called before I could reach for my phone. You found it. Page 17. Good. She knew. Careful. There was that word again. Cynthia knew the contractor had raised a question about landowner authorization, Rachel said. That's what the email proves. And she told them to proceed. Yes. Without asking me. I haven't seen evidence that you were asked. That was enough. I kept reading. 3 days later, Daniel sent another email warning that the final pole alignment should be confirmed against the easement limits before excavation. A field supervisor replied that HOA representatives had approved the marked locations. Attached was a photograph. Orange paint cross green pasture. In the background stood my red gate. I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. They hadn't accidentally wandered onto my property. Someone had questioned the boundary before the first auger touched soil. The next attachment was worse. A work log from installation day noted. Temporary livestock panels repositioned for equipment access. No mention of restoring them. I opened my security footage beside the document. 3:07 p.m. 2 workers moved the panels. 5:26 p.m. They packed equipment. 5:42 p.m. Cynthia inspected the installation. 6:03 p.m. Everyone left. The panels remained displaced. At 11:37 that night, Roscoe and June encountered the newly energized lights. The timeline fit almost too neatly. Rachel didn't celebrate. Save the produced files exactly as received. Already done. And remember, this doesn't erase the fact that your animals damaged equipment. I know. What it does is complicate causation and their claim for full reimbursement. I looked toward the pasture. June was standing beside Roscoe under a cottonwood tree, both animals calm in the afternoon shade. Nobody had trained them to attack lights. Nobody had released them as revenge. They'd been inside their normal enclosure when strangers changed the enclosure and installed unfamiliar equipment. That distinction was becoming impossible to ignore. At 5:20, Cynthia called. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. Mason, the board has scheduled an enforcement hearing for Tuesday. Good. She hesitated. You intend to contest the assessment? Yes. You have video showing your animals caused the damage. I do. Then I'm not sure what you think you're contesting. I turned toward the window. The other half of the video. Silence. What does that mean? It means Tuesday should be interesting. Mason, threats won't help you. That wasn't a threat. I lowered my voice. It was a date. She ended the call. Rachel called 5 minutes later after receiving the hearing notice. We keep this simple, she said. No speeches about corruption. No accusing anyone of crimes. Documents, measurements, timeline. Understood. Let Cynthia make the case about the donkeys first. I smiled. Why? Because she's going to prove the part we aren't disputing. Tuesday evening, I loaded 3 things into my truck. Caleb's certified survey, the contractor emails, and the original $96,000 assessment. Before leaving, I stopped at the red gate. Roscoe walked over and pressed his nose against my shoulder. You caused a ridiculous amount of paperwork, I told him. He snorted. Across the pasture, the damaged lights stood dark against the sunset. Cynthia thought Tuesday's hearing was about proving my donkeys broke them. She was right. They had. But once everyone agreed on that, I had only one question left. Why had those lights been standing on my land at all? The first photograph Cynthia put on the screen showed Roscoe standing beside a shattered light. It was almost perfect. His ears were forward. Broken plastic glittered in the grass. Behind him, one black pole leaned toward the fence like he'd personally decided modern architecture had gone too far. Nearly 60 homeowners filled the Cedar Ridge clubhouse. Cynthia sat at the center of the board table. Rachel sat beside me. Caleb waited near the projector with his certified survey rolled beneath one arm. Cynthia clicked to the next photograph. A dented equipment housing. Then another. Hoof marks and fresh soil. The evidence is straightforward, she said. Mr. Whitaker's livestock caused substantial damage to association infrastructure. Cedar Ridge seeks recovery of documented costs totaling $96,000. People turned toward me. Rachel whispered, "Now." I stood. "My donkeys damaged those lights." The room went quiet. Cynthia blinked. I could almost see her wondering whether I'd just saved everyone an hour. "I've never denied that," I continued. "Roscoe and June interacted with the equipment after it was installed and energized inside their pasture." Cynthia leaned toward her microphone. "Then liability is established." "No," I looked at Caleb. "Show them where the equipment was installed." The screen changed. A satellite image appeared. Red line, my deeded property. Blue strip, the recorded 12-foot drainage easement. Yellow circles, Cedar Ridge's lighting installations. Caleb explained his survey methodology without drama. Then he enlarged the eastern boundary. 3 yellow circles sat partly or entirely beyond the blue strip. The control cabinet sat outside it. A board member named Thomas Avery leaned forward. "Are those lights on Mr. Whitaker's property?" "The underlying land is within his deeded parcel," Caleb said. "The blue area is the recorded easement. Several installations extend beyond that area." Cynthia interrupted. "The HOA has long-standing infrastructure rights along that corridor." Rachel opened the recorded easement. "For drainage inspection, maintenance, repair, and replacement." She looked toward the board. "We have asked for any recorded instrument authorizing decorative lighting or expansion beyond those purposes. None has been produced." Cynthia's expression tightened. I changed the slide. Security footage. 2:18 p.m. Cynthia's SUV appeared. 2:31. The excavator entered through my red gate. 3:07. 2 workers moved the livestock panels. Nobody spoke as the video continued. The timestamp reached 6:03. The crew left. The panels remained displaced. Then I displayed the contractor log. Temporary livestock panels repositioned for equipment access. Thomas looked toward Cynthia. "You knew livestock were kept there?" "It was visibly agricultural property." "That wasn't my question." Her jaw tightened. "Yes." Rachel displayed the project manager's email. "Do we have landowner approval for installations extending beyond the recorded drainage easement?" Then Cynthia's response filled the screen. "Owner authorization pending. Proceed under existing easement." A murmur moved through the room. Thomas read it again. "You told them to proceed before receiving authorization?" Cynthia straightened. "The association believed the existing easement was sufficient." "Then why does your email say authorization pending?" Silence. For the first time all evening, nobody was looking at Roscoe's photograph. Rachel moved to the $96,000 invoice. She highlighted the upgraded fixtures. Unfinished trenching. Project completion. Administrative charges. "We're not asking this board to decide every issue tonight," she said. "We're asking why Mr. Whitaker is being assessed the full cost of repairing, upgrading, and completing an installation whose authorization and placement are disputed." Cynthia reached for her microphone. Thomas stopped her. "One question first." He looked directly at her. "Did Mason Whitaker ever give written permission for this lighting project?" Cynthia glanced toward the association attorney. He didn't answer for her. Finally, she said, "No." The word landed softly. That made it heavier. The board recessed for 23 minutes. When they returned, Thomas read the decision. The $96,000 assessment was suspended pending independent legal and insurance review. No additional lighting work would occur on my parcel. Existing drainage access would remain unaffected. I gathered my papers. Cynthia watched me from across the room. "This isn't over," she said quietly. "I know." I picked up the original invoice. "But now we're finally asking the right question." Outside, the night was dark. Exactly the way my pasture used to be. The $96,000 bill disappeared 26 days after the hearing. Not dramatically. No judge slammed a gavel. No sheriff arrived at Cynthia's house. No crowd gathered outside Cedar Ridge with cameras. Rachel forwarded me a letter at 9:06 on a Monday morning. Subject: Withdrawal of Property Damage Assessment. I read the first paragraph standing in my barn aisle while June chewed hay behind me. The association was rescinding the assessment pending final resolution of responsibility among Cedar Ridge, its contractor, and applicable insurers. I called Rachel. "So I owe zero?" "Under this assessment, yes." I smiled. "Now you can say it," she added. "Say what?" "They lost the $96,000 demand." I laughed for the first time in weeks. But the letter wasn't the real ending. The outside legal review had gone further. It confirmed Caleb's survey placed the lighting installations on my deeded property, with several structures extending beyond the recorded drainage easement. Council also concluded that the easement language did not clearly authorize the decorative lighting project Cedar Ridge had attempted to install. The HOA still retained its legitimate drainage rights. Nobody disputed that. But drainage access wasn't ownership, and board approval wasn't permission to expand an easement. The contractor's insurer became involved because the livestock panels had been moved during installation and left displaced. The contractor disputed parts of Cedar Ridge's instructions. Cedar Ridge disputed parts of the contractor's execution. Rachel told me to let them argue among themselves. I happily did. Then came the equipment. Cedar Ridge proposed relocating the control cabinet and removing the poles that fell outside the approved corridor unless we negotiated a separate agreement. I didn't want the lights. Neither did Roscoe, apparently. So removal one. A crew arrived 2 weeks later. This time, everything was different. I received written notice 5 days beforehand. The foreman called me the morning of the work. We walked the site together. Temporary livestock fencing went up before machinery entered. Roscoe and June stayed in the western paddock. Caleb's boundary markers remained untouched. Watching that excavator enter through the red gate felt strangely satisfying. Same gate, same kind of machine, completely different process. Permission, notice, boundaries, responsibility. 3 boring words that would have prevented the entire mess. Cynthia wasn't there. Thomas Avery called me that afternoon. The board completed its governance review. I waited. Cynthia has been removed from authority over infrastructure and property access approvals. Is she still president? For now. That lasted 9 more days. She resigned at a special board meeting. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. Thomas later told me the HOA adopted a requirement that future projects near privately owned parcels receive documented boundary verification and legal review before construction authorization. That mattered more than watching Cynthia lose a title. A week later, Rachel finished negotiating a written access protocol between Cedar Ridge and me. The HOA could continue entering the 12-foot corridor for legitimate drainage purposes. They had to provide reasonable notice except in emergencies. Workers had to maintain livestock-safe barriers. Anything beyond the recorded easement required separate written permission. Simple, clear, recorded. When I signed it, Rachel slid the original $96,000 assessment across her desk. Want this? I picked it up. The paper felt absurdly ordinary. A month earlier, that number had been designed to scare me into paying before asking questions. Now it was just paper. I folded it once and carried it home. That evening, I walked the eastern pasture. The poles were gone. Freshly packed soil marked the places where they'd stood. June grazed near the creek. Roscoe followed me toward the red gate. Beyond the fence, Cedar Ridge's streets glowed beneath their own lights. Their property, their infrastructure, their choice. I looked down at the ground beneath my boots. My property, my responsibility, my choice. The HOA had billed me $96,000 because my donkeys damaged their lights. In the end, the question that killed their bill wasn't whether Roscoe and June had done it. Everybody knew they had. The question was much simpler. Who gave Cedar Ridge permission to put those lights there? And after 26 days of lawyers, surveys, emails, and meetings, the answer was finally written down. Nobody. 3 months later, Roscoe was standing exactly where the first light pole used to be. The pasture had gone back to darkness. Not absolute darkness. Cedar Ridge still glowed beyond my eastern fence, and the security lamp above the barn painted a soft amber circle over the gravel. But the hard white LEDs that had once turned my grass into a parking lot were gone. So were the concrete footings. The contractor had removed them, filled the holes, reseeded the disturbed ground, and restored the livestock barrier under the new access protocol. This time, they asked first. That still made me smile. I walked toward the red gate carrying the original $96,000 assessment folded inside my jacket. June grazed near the creek. Roscoe followed me, his hooves making dull thuds against the dry ground. The HOA had changed too. Thomas Avery became board president after Cynthia resigned. I didn't suddenly become friends with Cedar Ridge, but something healthier replaced the hostility. Procedure. If drainage crews needed access, I received notice. If an emergency threatened the drainage system, they could enter under the recorded easement. If Cedar Ridge wanted anything beyond that 12-foot corridor, they needed written permission. Nobody had to guess anymore. Caleb's certified survey was recorded with the boundary documentation Rachel helped organize. Copies of the access protocol went to both sides. The red gate stayed mine. The drainage easement remained theirs to use for its lawful purpose. That was the point Cynthia had missed from the beginning. Rights could overlap without becoming ownership. A few weeks after the settlement, Thomas called. You should know the board approved new project procedures. What kind? Boundary verification before construction near privately owned parcels. Legal review when easement scope isn't clear. Written landowner authorization when required. I leaned against the barn wall. That sounds painfully reasonable. He laughed. We're trying something new. I never heard from Cynthia again. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need to see her embarrassed. She'd taken a limited right and treated it like unlimited authority. When the documents caught up with her, the authority disappeared. That was consequence enough. I unfolded the old assessment beside the gate. Property damage assessment, $96,000. For weeks, that number had followed me everywhere. At breakfast, in the truck, across Rachel's conference table, on the projector at the hearing. Now the paper smelled faintly like dust and leather from riding inside my jacket. Roscoe leaned over my shoulder. Don't eat this. He reached for it anyway. I pulled it back. You've already cost enough paperwork. June brayed from across the pasture. I laughed. Then I looked toward the places where the lights had stood. I'd kept one damaged metal housing after the contractor documented it and confirmed it wasn't needed. It sat on a shelf in my barn now, dented along one side. Not a trophy, a reminder. The strange part was that Cynthia had been right about one thing. My donkeys damaged the lights. That fact never changed. What changed was everything around it. Where the lights were installed. Who owned the land beneath them. What the easement actually permitted. Who moved the livestock barrier. Who authorized construction before landowner approval had been obtained. Justice didn't require pretending Roscoe and June were innocent. It required telling the whole story. The sun dropped behind the cottonwoods. Roscoe stood beside the red gate while the last orange light faded from the pasture. He couldn't read a deed. He couldn't interpret an easement. He certainly couldn't understand a $96,000 invoice. But then again, he wasn't the one who needed to. The HOA billed me because my guard donkeys smashed their lights. They just forgot to ask why their lights were standing on my land. Roscoe never read the easement. He didn't need to. The HOA should have.